Hello. What's up, everyone? Get a lot of people joining us on YouTube, a couple people on Twitch. If people are comfortable, let us know where you're coming in from. Stefan's coming in from Miami. Let me know if anybody else is comfortable sharing where you are. Usually we get people all over the world in the stream, which is really cool. And Jens is in Germany across the world, which it must be late for you. 7 or 8, maybe?
9.
9? Okay, even later. Well, I'm glad your calendar works enough for you to hang out this late. I love it.
Yeah, I said this before. The benefit if you're a startup founder um, and you target like the North American market and you live in Germany, you can work
Mhm.
the whole day, and then when the Americans finally get up, you can start with the marketing and
Yeah,
you can start with the meetings.
there you go. Yeah, it's always a challenge having completely remote teams. Speaking of which, we've got someone joining from Kashmir, from Dallas, Utah, but originally from Russia. Dax is also in Miami, and Dax comments they have the exact same mic and mount. It's a classic. It's a really good one. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna get hands-on with WunderGraph, which I'm really excited about. We're gonna do we'll probably talk about like where the idea for WunderGraph came from, kind of the evolution of it, and then we'll get in and do this hands-on. And I'm really kind of excited about the tagline of like the Vercel for backend, which I think is such a fun example. We'll talk about that more. I think we'll even see like Vercel integration with this as well. But Jens, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you here. Do you want to tell people a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, I'm a self-taught developer actually. I don't have any CS degree or anything. Um, I'm a father of 2 kids, Leonie and Yannick. Leonie is 1.5, Yannick is 3.5. So I'm quite busy with 3 kids, 2 my own, and then WunderGraph. And yeah, super excited to be here. Um, I was working in tech for, I don't know, a couple of years. And I think, you know, it was around the time where, do you remember the time when there was this ongoing war around Docker Swarm and Kubernetes? That was kind of the time when I started
Okay.
thinking about WunderGraph. I was working for a larger company, and we had this problem that we were building a custom backend for frontend. So we had like 30 internal services, databases. We had weather APIs. We had APIs from AWS affiliates and all the other things. As we were building Germany's biggest news website, and we had to pull in all these different data sources. And so one big problem I realized at that time is there's like API gateways, and API gateways, they allow you to protect and secure and rate limit and do other things with your APIs. But more or less what you put behind an API gateway, even if it's protected in front of the API gateway, it's more or less still the same thing. And so if you are in a situation where you have to like pull together like 15 or more APIs, like a larger enterprise integration scenario, you're really up to yourself, because if you look at the like frameworks like Redwood, for example, or like very popular frameworks Next.js, the usual focus is you have a front end, you have a back end, you have a database. But what if I want to pull in API dependencies, lots of them? What if I have to make all those integrations? And what I realized is that most people in such a scenario, they are inventing their own solution. And so we were also inventing our own solution. So we were a news website, and we were figuring out patterns, how to build the best backend for frontend, how to integrate all those APIs. And we wasted a whole lot of time in that area. And I thought, this is stupid. Everybody's doing API integrations, everybody's pulling together APIs. Can we create a framework and make it easy? And so I started WunderGraph as a side project. it was actually a very long drag until it became a company. Like, especially in Germany, you don't have the access to venture capital
Mhm.
the way you have it in the US. So it was very hard for me to actually get going from the ground. And so I started with an open source framework, building that framework. It's all written in Go mostly. Now we have a lot more TypeScript for the infrastructure as code part, but we will look into that later. And yeah, with that open source tool, eventually I ran into someone who was willing to pay me money, so I would support them in using this open source tool. And that was around, I think, a year ago. And that kind of kicked off the process of turning an open source side project into a company. And here we are. And now we're going beyond just an open source framework to make it easier to integrate and build APIs. But on top of that, we are building a cloud platform that tries to take the ideas from Vercel and apply them to the backend, to the API layer. And yeah, I think that's super exciting because what we try is not just simplify the whole API integration part, but also simplify the DevOps part. Because nowadays, if you talk to lots of developers, they want to create a backend function, they want to integrate some APIs, they want to add authentication, and they don't want to mess around with, okay, how do I monitor this? How do I deploy this?
Yeah.
How do I set up my GitHub CI pipeline? All this kind of stuff. And that's what we're trying to simplify, what we're trying to take away in one single opinionated package. And yeah, that's the brief history of WunderGraph.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's where so many products now are coming from, is like individual pain points that people have, especially with like reinventing the wheel or like making it up each time you do it, kind of thing. And just like, I feel like opinions are now becoming more popular because we, as developers, we just want to build stuff. Like we just want to be able to build our product. So one of the things I do want to share, like after this, we'll get hands on and go into the dashboard. But I want to share quickly is the giveaway that we'll do. So let me open my screen. So what we're gonna do is we have $200 vouchers for the WunderGraph swag store. There's mugs and bags and hoodies and t-shirts and other stuff on there. So the way we're gonna do this is we'll pick two winners from comments on YouTube. And this is not live comments. This is not like in the chat live while you're watching. This is actually like commenting on the video itself. So if you're interested in the $100 swag pack, leave a comment on the actual YouTube video. If for some reason you can't find it later and you want me to send you the link to it, just DM me and I'll get it to you. But just leave a comment. And the kind of the questions that I was curious, going back to your point, is like, what sort of pain points have you had with creating your own APIs in the past? Or as you watch this, what's one of the features of WunderGraph that you think is most exciting? So hopefully you'll come up with several of those, but just leave a comment on the actual YouTube video relevant to either of those questions, and we'll choose a winner in the next couple of days, and then send you a message to get you your WunderGraph does not count as a commenter. WunderGraph is excluded from this giveaway, but we'll get notifications out to the winners in a couple of days. So, you ready to get started?
Question for me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the audience can't respond back unless they put it in the chat. So,
Okay. Yeah, got it. Yeah, I'm
yep.
ready. Let's go.
Nailed it. Cool. So one, there's like what I'm about to go into is the WunderGraph Cloud. Do you want to just really quickly before we get into that explain what WunderGraph Cloud is for people that are watching?
Maybe let's start with WunderGraph without the cloud.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So you can understand WunderGraph as something between a backend for frontend or a backend and an API gateway. Mm-hmm. So if you previously were using a backend or a backend for frontend, I would call like API routes in Next.js, I would probably call backend for frontend.
Yep.
Like I see a lot of people, like they have like a real backend somewhere else, like EC2 or
Yep.
ECS or something like that, and then like Next.js API routes, kind of like a backend for frontend, and that brought together with ideas from an API gateway. So protecting your APIs, facilitating authentication, authorization, role-based access, caching, all these kind of things, and that was one of the ideas that kind of draw the origin of WunderGraph, because prior to WunderGraph, I was working for an API management company called Tyke Technologies. So we were building an open source API gateway, also written in Go. I contributed a lot of the GraphQL functionality there. And one thing, building an API gateway, one thing I learned with that is there's kind of like a disconnect between using an API gateway and building a full stack application. Because when you're building a full stack application, like let's say you use something like Next.js, you have your API routes, there's like a very tight connection between front end and back end. Like you can create a backend function, you call it from the front end. In this kind of scenario, you would actually never want to use something like an API gateway. But what if you want to apply cross-cutting concerns like authentication, authorization? What if you don't want to do that yourself? You want to use an API gateway, but you actually don't want to run one. And that's what I came up with WunderGraph as the solution. So WunderGraph kind of, it blurs the lines between we're creating a backend and we're using an API gateway. And have you used API gateways before?
Specifically, API gateways like in AWS?
Yeah, like AWS API gateway, Kong, something like that.
No, not specifically.
Okay, so it's usually it's like a static component that is running all the time, and you have some APIs. You put it behind your API gateway, and then you can access that. So it's kind of like very static. Whereas a Next.js API route, it's very dynamic. Like you can change it all the time, redeploy and go. And so we really mimicked and adopted some of the patterns from Next.js and brought that together with an API gateway. And you will see when we do some coding together, you will be using kind of like an API gateway, but you won't notice. And then we will see that when we build something.
Yeah, the thing that I don't actually have much hands-on experience with AWS. Like I've built in stuff that I've done before, we built kind of our own custom API gateway, just a funnel to get to different API services and stuff. But the thing with AWS is typically it's just very cumbersome. There's so many things, it's a little overwhelming. And how do you find out how to do the exact thing that you're looking for? And I think that's kind of the power of this. Like we mentioned like Vercel as kind of a similar concept. Hosting in Vercel is drastically easier than hosting something directly in AWS. And I think for like the stuff that we're talking about here, this will pay off times a million in simplification of the entire process as well. Instead of going and doing it directly on AWS,
and I think that kind of it kind of foreshadows the future of how we build stuff in the cloud, because Vercel is AWS.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's just the abstractions.
Yep.
It's how you interact with the hardware or whatever it is, the virtual machines, and I think like AWS is amazing, but most people should never actually interact with AWS directly. And that's and we try, as I said earlier, we try to take the patterns from Vercel, apply that to backend and API development, and I think we should just get started.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. There's one, I'm not sure I'm following this exactly. There's a question on YouTube from Live Life the Way You Want. Clarification, since we're talking about cloud and backend, what is the use of a database since we perform all things in Salesforce and call using API to my website? So anything Salesforce specifically is kind of a totally different conversation, but Salesforce in theory will have a database behind it, and then mention using an API to bring data to your website. So we'll actually see in this case how we tap into external APIs and then funnel them behind kind of the API gateway, which is in this case WunderGraph, and kind of connect different ones and stitch it all together. So we'll see some of that stuff hands on. But anything Salesforce specifically is going to be a different conversation. Clash Game just joined on YouTube. Hello, hello. So this is WunderGraph homepage. I'll put a link to this in the chat for people that maybe want to check it out themselves. I signed up for my account earlier, and this is just taking me into WunderGraph Cloud. So we'll create a new project. We'll start it off from scratch and go through it. This is one that I did just an hour ago to kind of walk through it. But should I go ahead and just create a brand new project inside of the dashboard?
Maybe we can step one. We get one step back and go back to the landing page, because I just want to show something that I think is super important for, like, when you're building. I mean, we're all here to learn something, to improve, right? But when you're building something today, I think what is super important, like if you build your landing page, and again, we think Vercel is a brilliant role model here. Like, as you go through the page and you follow the story, at the very end, like if you scroll all the way down, you can learn a bit about the concepts, what we do. At the very bottom, you can see right at the landing page, we can now start deploying our first Next.js application. And I think it's so important to build applications. Even like when you start building a new startup, the thing you should think about is onboarding. How can I make it easy to onboard people? And I always had the dream that you read a story on the landing page, and when you're done with that, like right before the story, we have some social proof. If you want to structure the content, you tell the story, then you have some social proof, and at the very end, you can now start deploying your app. And I think, like, when you start a new startup, that should be the structure, and the architecture of your application should support this onboarding flow, because I think that's just superior to anything else. So yeah, let's start deploying a Next.js app.
Cool, I love it. And then people can see this, but other options are Vite with SWR, Next.js and React Query, and Remix as well. So maybe there's new frameworks kind of on the horizon in the future as well. One of my favorites is FeltKit. I love Next.js as well. But
as we speak, we are we are currently working on support for Solid.js.
Cool.
Svelte, and Vue. So we've got all of them almost.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, super cool. Sweet. So I'll go ahead and start to deploy that. And as this is kind of running through the deployment, well, let's get through this part first. So this is going to create.
You signed up already with GitHub, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So for everybody that maybe is going along for this for the first time, you will sign up. I signed up with my GitHub account. It's free. It does a connection, and then everything is connected, and I can get to the point where I am now.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool. Parzival asked what other frameworks are in the works. I think we covered that question, so that might have just been a timing thing. But Vue and Svelte and Solid were the ones that you mentioned, which are super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the most asked questions in recent weeks is, do we support Svelte? And yeah, we're working on that. I think it's
happy to respond to that soon.
I don't have an opinion on what is the best framework. I'm like, I can do some React, but whenever it comes to making something beautiful, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's I pass this to someone who can actually do it. So yeah.
Got a question about well, one, I'm going to click a link so it's kind of loading while we're talking, but this is going to create a new GitHub repository for me. So it's actually going to create a new repo with a copy of like starter code with Next.js and WunderGraph. So I can create this. It'll go and create that repo. And question in the chat about Astro. Is that a framework that you've thought about for supporting in the future? That's another one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't fully understand it. Like, I'm a bit too disconnected from Frontend. I read something about Frontend islands and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Definitely on the horizon.
Horizon. Yeah, yep. So I'm choosing region is New York City in the States, and then a project name, and we'll go ahead and deploy. Here's a great question, and I think people are going to be really excited to kind of hear part of this answer as this is building. Why does a backend infrastructure startup need to integrate with front end frameworks? So in other words, what are the benefits that we're going to get with you integrating directly with a framework? So specifically today, when we work with Next.js, what are some of the benefits that come with working with WunderGraph specifically in Next.js?
So there was a talk from Neon Tech at the recent JS something conf, and they were talking about previews. And I think the title was something like, what was it? Something is dead. Not production. What's before production?
Staging is
Yeah,
dead.
staging is dead. Long live previews.
That's
Exactly.
right. Long
So
live
what
testing and
we're
production.
yeah, so we are a fast moving startup. We release something even if it's not perfect. So we don't yet have previews, but everything is architected in a way that you can preview the backend. And so one thing WunderGraph will do. So Vercel started this previewization. So everything can now, like you open a pull request, you get a preview.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like serverless. You can have a serverless backend, but if your database is not serverless, it's not scalable.
Yep.
You can have a previewable front end, but if your backend is not previewable
Yep.
and your database is not previewable, it's kind of like odd.
Yep.
And so I think the future of web development looks like everything is previewable. Like, and not just front end, but also back end. What does it mean? It doesn't just mean that if I open a PR, it creates like a second deployment and that's a preview. But if you're building a backend and that's something we want to take care of and we want to do the DevOps part, there will be things like migrations. There will be like if you have something like Neon Tech, which we are currently building an integration with, or Planet Scale,
Yep.
those are databases that they allow branching already. So your front end branches, your backend with WunderGraph will be able to branch, and your database can branch. But it doesn't stop there. Like there's so many other things. Like what about authentication? What about the key value store? What about pops up? Things that we have on the roadmap. These are all going to be components where, and that's our plan. We want to build not just a backend framework or a backend API gateway framework, but also like from day one, our architecture is built in a way that it's going to be previewable. So you can, yeah, create a new database schema, open a PR, and you can be on a preview branch. You can try something out, show it to people. It will be a full blown backend with like whatever you have configured, like a key value store, pops up,
Mhm.
anything, messaging, cron jobs, whatnot, and you will have a preview branch, and it will be 100% isolated, independent. And I think that's what makes the whole thing special.
Yeah. I worked for PlanetScale for a while, and so the idea of, like, the evolution of databases trying to match, like, modern DevOps practices is, definitely something I'm familiar with. One of the like, going back to kind of the specific questions of integration with front-end frameworks, I feel like an example of this that we'll see is automatically generated clients. So based on your schemas and the APIs that you're pulling in and connecting to, WunderGraph is gonna generate a type safe client. So it gives you something if people have used React Query, it gives you like a use query hook, for example. And you can it's type safe, so you know the data that you're getting back, the inputs that go in, and that is specifically generated for, in this case, what we'll see is Next.js. So the direct
Mm.
integration with front-end frameworks is the ability to generate code to make it easier and quicker to work with WunderGraph inside of the framework that people are using.
Yeah. One thing to note here, everybody can generate code, and there are so many code generators. But the thing is, there's no code generator. Like, first of all, there's no code generator that is like configuration less, and all our templates, it's always like it just works. Second, the way code generation works in WunderGraph is we have the concept of API dependencies. So in WunderGraph, if you go to wundergraph.com, you scroll below the fold, you will see the virtual graph. Okay, what's the virtual graph? WunderGraph has the concept of API dependencies, which means you can import databases, APIs, services into what we call the virtual graph. And we automatically, like, it can be a REST API from Stripe, it can be a GraphQL API from HighGraph, or whatever. It can be a Postgres database. WunderGraph reads them in, introspects them, adds them to the virtual graph. And now what we do is we combine all these data sources together into
one API,
into one GraphQL API.
Yeah.
We call it virtual graph because we don't actually expose GraphQL, but I don't want to go like over the top in too short amount of time. But essentially, what we allow you to do is talk one single language to all your API dependencies. And that means for code generation, yes, everybody can code generate, but can you code generate with doing almost nothing across 5 REST APIs, a Postgres database, and some GraphQL APIs? And the answer will probably be no.
Yeah, I love it. There's a question from Alberto. Can I deploy the templates for free? Yes, everything that I'll do today, like deploying, will be on the free tier. And someone mentioned kind of a comparison to an API mono repo, just kind of a concept of like bringing a bunch of things into one. I think that's a cool example, again, to reiterate your point, like an API mono repo that you also don't have to generate code for or do anything manually other than just teach it where to get the connections from. Because you mentioned introspection for people who maybe aren't familiar with that idea. Basically, what it does is it makes a request to a database or it makes a request to an API, and it looks at the data that it gets back, and it looks at the shape of the data. What are the different properties that it returns? And then it generates schemas in this case that becomes the virtual graph for us that we can then pick and choose what we want from these different resources. But it does all that stuff for you, which I think is really pretty amazing.
You know, imagine you're a company, you have a couple of teams, and one team, they have some super amazing JavaScript, and they want to share it with another team. So what do? You create an NPM package, you publish that to an NPM registry, and now the other team can download this NPM package as a dependency. And let's think about another scenario. You have a bunch of teams. One team has 3 REST APIs, another team has a GraphQL API. You want to share that with the other teams. What do? Where's the API package manager, where you can just say or treat APIs like a package? What we do then is, yeah, some people they upload protobuf files for gRPC, they upload that into Git, or they have an open API. Stripe has an open API file sitting in Git. Is that the ideal? So, like, it's not bad. They have an open API spec. It's good, but how do you integrate with Stripe with their REST API if you're not downloading the SDK, but using their open API file? You go to Git, you download that open API file, then you think about, okay, what code generator could I use? Okay, I use that one. Why? Can we not make it simpler? And that's kind of the thoughts that led to what we did.
Yeah. There's a question from S Chassis. Does it do comparisons between separate sets of data? Like if I had a Chat GPT API that returns an answer and a separate API that returns a similar but different answer, does it do validation on results? My guess for this is that's still application logic. So if you're bringing in 2 different APIs and you ask both individual API the same question and get 2 different responses, I think it sounds like that would be like application logic to figure out which one of those to take, for example, if you're choosing the best between either one, if that makes sense.
Yes. So our goal is to take away the pain of integrating, but leave the business logic and leave like full customizability to the developer.
Yeah.
And like for a very long time, and that's one of the main goals of WunderGraph, I want to allow developers to focus on what creates value for their business and their company. Like, do not do boring, repetitive stuff. Like, I can tell you one example. WunderGraph uses Fly.io behind the scenes. So we use Fly as a hosting provider. Fly has two APIs, a REST API that is undocumented. Can you please create an open API file? Maybe that would be nice. And they also have a GraphQL API. And I've built the integration with their APIs. And the way you build an API integration in Go without using WunderGraph is you download their GraphQL schema, then you pull a library in Go that can take a GraphQL schema and generate a client. Then you configure that client to read GraphQL operations from a file and generate a TypeScript, a type-safe client. Imagine you have to do that for like 5 or 10 APIs. Like, what kind of mess are you actually creating? And the moment Fly changes their API, and I didn't, at that point, I don't re-download the file, or the moment they break something, like, I hope they don't, but should that happen, my whole deployment is broken. And yeah, I just don't like that flow.
Not a good, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so usually it takes 2 minutes for the initial deploy. So we talked so much, it should be deployed already.
It should be done, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Now we have WunderGraph deployed. We can talk later a bit about what actually happened here. But I think the next important step to get going is we want to connect this with Vercel. So I would suggest you just go straight to Vercel and build a project there too. Okay. And use the same code base.
So for reference, the Git repository, if people are curious, I'll put a link to this in the chat. So this is the repository that was generated for me. It was then connected to our deployed WunderGraph instance. And so now I'm going to add a new project inside of Vercel. I'm going to do an import and make sure I choose the project that we just created, which is 3A9. Import that. No specific custom details in here. Just go ahead and deploy on Vercel.
Yes. Cool. Everything else will be confusing.
Yeah. So do you want to talk like what's going to be the benefit of this connection, this direct connection here eventually?
Okay. So we have WunderGraph. Oh, okay. One very important thing. We focus on the backend. Okay. We don't want to build a CDN for front ends. Vercel, they have middleware. They integrated with Cloudflare workers. They do so many things like image processing and stuff, and they are focused all around, like all the things you need in the front end. We're not building or solving front end problems. We're solving API problems. Yeah. Like one of the important things, if you go like larger architectures, you need stuff like distributed tracing. You want to look into every request. You want to know exactly where is a request actually being executed. Like if you think about, we love to talk about edge computing and bring stuff using the edge, bring it close to the user. One problem what edge computing actually creates, and that's something that we want to reverse that problem and solve it for people again. If you bring stuff close to the user, you move it far away from the origin. Because if you have an application that's combined of a database in New York and a bunch of REST APIs in Frankfurt and a GraphQL API in San Francisco, is it smart? like if you're interacting with a database in New York and your logic is on the edge and your user is in Frankfurt, should you be interacting with a database? Like if you do multiple round trips from Frankfurt to New York, is that smart, or should you do that from New York? And that's the kind of stuff that we want to focus on, like bring insights into backend, and we're not just making a fetch call or something to the database, but there's a lot more behind that to make that efficient.
Yeah. That's actually, I think, one of the things people miss a lot with the idea of the edge is where your databases are often not at the edge and not replicated. So there is usually logic running at the edge that then is having to go all the way back to the original data center anyway, which has always been an interesting point for me that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about. But anyway, the Vercel project is now completed. So we've deployed the project in WunderGraph, which generated a GitHub project. We then connected or created a new project in Vercel based on that same GitHub repo.
Yeah. Okay. So now we have one problem. We have a Next.js app. It's running on Vercel, and it has no clue where we deployed this WunderGraph thing. So we need to fix that problem. I could now say, okay, go to WunderGraph, copy the URL, paste it over to Vercel, set it up. But then how would that work in preview environments, et cetera, et cetera? So what we do is we go to our WunderGraph Cloud dashboard. You can go to settings and click on integrations and connect Vercel. And I really hope for one of my employees that this actually works.
Let's do specific project. We'll do this one. Let's add the integration. And basically what this is going to do behind the scenes is make a longer standing connection, but probably set like environment variables inside of Vercel so the application knows.
Yeah, so we exchange credentials, and that allows us, so if you connect those two projects, choose the right one, please. It allows us to use webhooks and API calls and then connect the two applications.
So cool. I'd love to eventually, like, I'd love to have someone do a deep dive on how the integrations work with a platform like Vercel. I think that'd be really interesting.
Honestly, like Vercel, it's probably like, I cannot talk much about Vercel, but I think it's super cool to integrate with GitHub, like all the things you can do and how you can react to GitHub webhooks and it's very interesting, especially if you have a GitHub application and you work with permissions. Like, it is not easy. Okay, so we've connected that. I think we need to do one redeploy on the Vercel app.
Cool. And this is because I imagine like environment variables and things have changed behind the scenes that it needs to rerun to be able to get access to.
Exactly.
Yep. So let's go to deployment.
I think you need to click those 3 dots, and then redeploy.
And redeploy. Cool.
Yes.
With the existing cache. Yep. Make it a little faster. Cool.
And again, that's the basic. That was DevOps.
Yeah. So again, the relationship here at a high level for people that are interested, basically the front end application is the Next.js code that source code we haven't looked at yet, but it was generated for us as a starter in a GitHub repo. It's hosted on Vercel. The backend that now we're restarting for it to connect to is WunderGraph, which is where the API gateway and kind of mesh, like whatever term you want to use, is hosted there. We'll see the source code and some details behind that in a second. But now these two things are connected where you kind of have front end and Vercel, and then your back end is taken care of for you through WunderGraph.
Yes.
There's a question from, I apologize if I don't pronounce this correctly, Amo. Feel free to clarify if you want to in the chat. But Amo is asking, how does the Vercel integration compare to the Netlify integration? Do you have a similar integration with Netlify?
We don't yet have that. If you know somebody at Netlify, we would love to have that. So, join our Discord, send a message, whatever, and would love to build that as well.
And I imagine it's a similar concept, right? Like they would have similar hooks and environment variables and things that you would tap into. So
Yeah, I mean, you come from PlanetScale or worked there before.
Mhm.
I think it's now becoming like the standard. If you have a company like Vercel, PlanetScale, or Netlify, you should offer OAuth
Integration.
2
Yeah.
and allow other people to build integrations and work with your
Yep.
connect with your platform, make that easy.
Yep. Absolutely. Notice now we have like a preview of this coming through, and if I open up the site, it's actually loading data from WunderGraph. So the Dragon data, like we'll see this a little bit more specifically in a second, but it's kind of set up to talk to a SpaceX Dragon's API. Again, we'll see the configuration in a second, but just to show that like front end to back end, this is deployed on Vercel. You have a Next.js providing the front end, which is querying data from the WunderGraph deployed instance in WunderGraph Cloud.
Yeah. And one thing you could now already do is if you click the refresh button like 3 times and we go to our cloud, you can already check the analytics and you should see some traffic there. Yep.
Yeah. So you see those requests coming through. Also, one of the things I noticed earlier, I mentioned there's like a kind of a use query type hook, which is if people have used similar things, you may recognize this idea, but you'll see kind of a revalidation request go after clicking away from the app and coming back to it after a certain amount of time. So it has like that kind of revalidation concept that people are used to, I think, with other similar like use query hooks from React Query or SWR or whatever it is.
Yeah, we're actually, I think in this scenario, we're using SWR. So we built our code generation around SWR and React Query. Don't reinvent the wheels. And one thing you can also see, if you click on this Dragon's request and you click on headers, you might, I don't know how much experience you have with GraphQL, but does it look like GraphQL?
No, it does not.
Not really, no. It's a GET request.
Yep.
We call /operation/dragons, and the variables are some weird gibberish. And yeah, that's one of the features of WunderGraph. We hide, like you will see that it feels like you're using GraphQL or TypeScript. We also have TypeScript functionality, but it feels like we're using GraphQL, but we never actually use GraphQL at runtime. What this allows us to do is you can easily apply edge caching, stuff like that, on the HTTP layer, and you don't have to worry about, let's say you add a lot of API dependencies and you have a gigantic GraphQL API, or even if it's just a small GraphQL API, but you might be worrying about, okay, what happens if someone calls like whatever super complex query and they load too much data, something like that. With WunderGraph, this is why we call it the virtual graph. GraphQL is not a runtime thing. Like there's no GraphQL at runtime. This is really just a persisted operation or an RPC call. So what we're doing is we tell the server, hello server, during development, we created a file that's called dragons.graphql. Would you be so kind and execute that for me? And here's the variables. And the server oblige and does that. So there's no sending post request, stuff like that. A query should be a GET request, and it should not expose any GraphQL thing or make that. So this way we make it more performant, we make it secure, and you can apply those stale while revalidate things. There's one thing in the response headers you might notice, we have an E tag. So this can actually easily use smart invalidation.
Oh, cool. Okay. And all of that is still abstracted away. Like in the code, we'll see the.
You will never see E tag anywhere. It just happens.
Yep. Cool. Amo in the chat saying, love the pattern. Awesome. There's one quick reminder for people. If you're interested in the swag giveaway, the way to be eligible for $200 credits for swag is to leave a comment on the YouTube video. So not in the stream itself, comment, like not the chat, but actual comment on the video. So make sure to do that. Something you enjoyed today about the product, or Or what was pain points that you've had with creating APIs or managing APIs, things that you've had struggle with in the past. All right.
Did you have a reminder for that, or I would have easily forgotten that?
Yeah. I meant to do it like 10 minutes ago and just remembered again, so I figured I would call it out. So
Okay.
cool.
Great. So we want to show some DevOps capabilities, or no ops capabilities, actually. I think we should clone this repo and check out how WunderGraph works locally, and how we can make a change.
Yeah. So I'll put the link to the repo in the chat so people can go and see the actual code. I'll clone this here and then open this up. And we'll need to install all of our dependencies. So I'll go ahead and run that. And then anything in particular that you want me to open up while that's installing?
Yeah. So we have a dot folder, .wundergraph. Some people complained that this is stupid. I don't know. At some point, I just wanted to make this folder like super special, and I thought, okay, let's create a .wundergraph folder. So .wundergraph, if you see something like .wundergraph, then you know, okay, this is a WunderGraph project. You can see that WunderGraph and npm and Next.js, it's actually side by side, and that's one of the patterns. So the way you would use WunderGraph is you will always have it side by side with your front end code, and this is something. If you think about the traditional model of API gateways, you would never ever have your API gateway stuff
Tied together. Yeah.
side by side with the front end, and we're breaking with that pattern. So one thing we should look at is the WunderGraph config TS. Like, that's the central point of doing stuff. And here you can see one of the core concepts of WunderGraph. I talked before about that, the concept of API dependencies. So normally, like, you want to use React, you do npm install React. You want to use Stripe REST API, you go to Git and you download the file, and then you try to code gen. And then if you want to use a GraphQL API, I explained the problems I had integrating Fly before. And with WunderGraph, we do it completely differently. We treat APIs like dependencies. So here you can see introspect GraphQL. We give it an API namespace. API namespace means we add a prefix to all fields and types of the API to not create any naming collisions.
Yeah.
And if you, after line 16, if you make a little bit of space, like two new lines after line 16, yes, you can also type introspect and then dot, and you see that we can introspect Apollo Federation APIs, GraphQL, MongoDB, MySQL, OpenAPI, PlanetScale, Postgres, Prisma, SQLite, and SQL Server. And if you need anything else, then yeah, come to our Discord and let's talk about the other data sources you want to use. In the future, we also want to integrate with services like event-driven systems like Kafka or RabbitMQ, AMQP, stuff like that. So yeah, we definitely want to add more data sources in the future. For this simple example, we have the introspect GraphQL, and I think we need to run. I don't know. Let's look at the package JSON. I think something like.
Yeah, I was kind of going through this earlier. So there's two separate things that get run. So this start command runs the dev command, which is nextdev. It also runs WunderGraph, and then it runs an open command, which will open up the two tabs that people care about. So when this runs WunderGraph, what is WunderGraph actually doing when it's running, in this case, locally as part of the start command?
Okay, so what this does is we use ESBuild to build the WunderGraph config TS. That builds two things. For one, it builds the config code, because we create the configuration from your TypeScript code. And second, it builds a Fastify server. because we allow you to create hooks and functions and all kind of things using TypeScript, and we run that inside the Fastify server. Alongside, we have our gateway, which is written in Go, high performance, super fast, that does all the GraphQL, like WunderGraph things and compiler stuff. And so, yeah, what this does is we compile the config, we compile your hooks, your extensions, your TypeScript functions, and then we run the gateway, feed the config to the gateway, start the Fastify server, and yeah, then you have a gateway, you have your backend, and you can talk to it from Next.js.
Super cool. Let me go ahead and run that. I'll do a bunch of things behind the scenes, and it opened up on the wrong monitor. So let me bring this over to the correct one. So this is the this is our Next.js application running here, and then we'll also have a dashboard for WunderGraph here. So is this kind of representing the Go server that's running behind the scenes?
Yes, exactly. So that's the Go server, exactly. The Go server, behind the Go server, we have the Fastify server. So Fastify is not connected to the public internet. In this case, it's protected by the Go gateway. And yeah, that's the basic architecture.
Cool. Cool. Do you want to take a look at like I've mentioned this a couple of times, but the use query hook? Do you want to show what that looks like and how that works?
Okay, I think the first concept that you need to understand when you use WunderGraph is, so the first two concepts, we introspected GraphQL, so now we have the SpaceX API, and we want to create an endpoint. And in WunderGraph, we call this operation. So if we open the operations directory, you can see here we have a file. It's called dragons. And the first thing we could do is we add a field like ID after active. So we make a little change. You can see that by default, you have auto completion here. So we also generate a .graphql rc.yaml. So should you ever want to build a GraphQL API and make that type safe, one very important thing, if you go back to that RC file, because we can teach people a little trick. Yeah. So we introspect your APIs and we generate that into .wundergraph generated WunderGraph schema GraphQL. And if you now put this .graphql RC file into the root of the project, it's important that it's in the root. And you have installed the GraphQL extension in VS Code. I guess you've already done that before, right?
I'm not sure. Let me make sure. No, I have not. The syntax highlighting one?
Yeah, I think that's important.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's required that you reboot, restart VS Code. Otherwise it wouldn't work.
It sometimes it is, sometimes it didn't prompt me for it. So it may. Is there an easy way for us to gauge?
Go to the Dragons GraphQL.
Yeah.
And make a new line after line 5, and then trigger code completion.
Like with command period?
Yeah, something. Does it work?
It says no code actions available.
Okay, I think we need to restart.
Should I restart it? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's kill this. Start. Opened up on the wrong monitor again. And then, so still no, like if I do command period in here, still no autocomplete suggestions.
That's weird.
Are you looking for IntelliSense on the properties themselves? Like which ones?
You should have that, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why you don't, but if you like command click on SpaceX Dragons, does it give you anything? Okay, somehow it understands it, right? Okay, I guess it works. Okay,
Yeah,
but
it's
yeah,
definitely
this is
pulling
fine.
stuff in. Yeah,
Okay,
it's definitely, yeah.
okay. So we added the ID field, and if we now go to our user interface,
So go to, I think it's the index page where we use this.
just go to the front end, to the browser.
Oh, sorry, gotcha. To this one.
Yes, and now here we have the ID field as well.
ID, gotcha.
Right?
Yep.
Okay, and I think that's a great, like, very little step, first step we can make. We can actually deploy this. So if you just make a commit,
Edit ID field, and then you go ahead and push to main.
yeah.
Also, WunderGraph, the YouTube account commented, "We all use JetBrains at work. Sometimes VS Code can be tricky." I've never
Yeah.
actually used JetBrains. For people that I've heard use it, they say they love it. I'd be really curious if anybody else in the chat has used JetBrains and or prefers it over VS Code. I've always been a big fan of VS Code, but I've heard really good things about JetBrains.
You know, it's funny. I love JetBrains for Go. So they have GoLand for which is for Go. It's excellent. I sometimes feel like the support for TypeScript is a little like VS Code is better for TypeScript.
For TypeScript, yeah, I could see that. By the way, this is kicking off the build in WunderGraph, so it picked up the push to main and the GitHub repository. I assume like webhook connection or whatever is triggering this rebuild of the actual server hosted in WunderGraph Cloud.
Yeah, you can also click on that if you want.
Yeah.
And we can see the logs.
Amos says absolutely JetBrains. It's like VS Code with 1,000 extensions already baked in. And Aaron mentioned WebStorm, which is by JetBrains. I assume when people say JetBrains and they're talking JavaScript, TypeScript, Go, that's probably specifically WebStorm, right? Like it's a WebStorm is the IDE from JetBrains. Is that right?
They have many, like WebStorm. I think that's for like front end.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's the name for the Java one, but my main IDE is
IntelliJ?
GoLand.
Oh, GoLand is an actual separate IDE.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I don't even know like why, because it always feels like they are all just the same. Just
yeah.
I don't understand why they have multiple.
As long as they work well, yeah.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention here is like when you do a deployment, and I think it's super exciting for me to talk about that because we put so much work into this. Our deployment, are you familiar with Temporal?
I've heard of them, but I don't really know. I don't really know what they do.
So it's like a workflow engine. So you can design long-running operations using Temporal.
Okay.
And behind the scenes, if you're interested in the chat, I will keep it brief. And if you're interested in the chat, then you can just ask questions, and we can talk more about that. But in short, what happens when you make a deployment? So we get the webhook from GitHub. We take that webhook, we create a workflow on Temporal, and then we kick off a fly machine, which is a short, like it's like a virtual machine on Firecracker. And what's very interesting about that is, so we really wanted to make the CI super fast. And one way to do that is, it sounds ridiculous at first, but we have one virtual machine as the builder per project. What is special about this? Most of the time, this machine actually sleeps. So we're not paying anything for that. So we create one machine. It has a volume attached. So it's a Firecracker machine, 5 GB volume attached. When you install your npm dependencies for the first time, we install that on the volume. And then what happens is, when you make a git push, we create a job in Temporal. We start the machine up. It takes a couple hundred milliseconds, the machine comes up. The machine is actually a worker, a temporal worker. It pulls the job from the work queue, executes the build using the local drive as the cache, which makes that super fast, executes the whole build, and if there's no other job to be done, we shut it down again. So it's kind of like super weird, but we have one virtual machine that's there for building your stuff. And we didn't want to go with like, there's if you build a platform, there's like services from Google or AWS to build stuff, but they are like that slow. And like we're currently measuring, depending on the performance we get from the Fly platform, but we're currently measuring build or deployment times around 20 to 30 seconds to build your whole API gateway, the backend, everything, and deploy that. And I think it's super important if you want to build this previewable future of web development. You must be able to iterate fast. So that's one critical component in our architecture.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, since we've already made the connection to the GitHub repo in Next.js, this will have, I don't know if I still have the deployed version open, but this will have rebuilt the Next.js app as well. So if I go to this to the home, I guess I could just open it here, and this should have that latest data with the ID here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Next thing I think we could look into is combining two APIs.
Cool. Really quickly, there's a question from Riker on YouTube. Welcome, by the way. So WunderGraph asking if WunderGraph is a serverless function hosting provider. So no, it's not a serverless function hosting provider. It is kind of an API gateway, API aggregator that is, if you use WunderGraph Cloud in this case, is hosted for you. You can connect different APIs and databases into the virtual graph and then interact with the virtual graph directly in your application. So simplifying connecting all of those things.
I have to disagree a very slight bit.
Yeah.
Because it is also allowing you to run a serverless function. Like if you open in operations, you have users, and there's a get function. So that's just a regular function we define. So before we created a Dragon's GraphQL, here we created a users get.ts with a very special syntax, create operation dot query. And this way we can just create a type safe API using TypeScript. And one thing that is special about the architecture of WunderGraph is, so for one, WunderGraph is serverless in the sense that when you don't have any requests coming to your service, we make it hibernate. Mm-hmm. So that means it's very similar pattern to serverless. At the same time, we are not using AWS Lambda or anything. If you have constant traffic or the requirement that your backend runs all the time, you can have an API request that can last, or it can be a streaming operation. If you go to the subscribe.ts, we can also define subscriptions using TypeScript. So here we have an async generator with this handler syntax. And you can see here in line 10, we iterate from 0 to 10, or I think 9. And we can yield multiple times, and then we wait a promise that sets a timeout for 1 second. So what we could be doing here is we can stream for, I don't know, hours if we want to do that. And WunderGraph would totally allow you to do that. So there's no limitation in runtime or anything. So it's kind of like serverless and not serverless.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess my original interpretation was if you're if you're specifically looking at this as a place to host serverless functions versus all the other things that you get with WunderGraph. So I wanted to make sure that like the things that we've talked about so far also get wrapped up in the response to that question
Yeah,
for those benefits. So
absolutely. But honestly, we would love for you to create just simple, like if you go back to the get function, which is kind of like a canonical example of doing almost nothing. We define an input, the ID, which is a string, and then we have a very little output. It is totally fine to do something like that.
yeah.
One thing that's very special about WunderGraph, you will see that we're not just creating API routes, stuff like that, but everything is always, we try to optimize the developer experience. So everything is always type safe, and that has a reason. If you go, like, if you remember here, we have this get TS, it defined input, and it's in users get. So if we now go to our dashboard, the cloud dashboard,
Okay.
yes. Okay, and you
The
go to
operations.
operations. First of all, you can see we have dragons, users get, users subscribe, users update. You can copy the URL of those. You can also download the Postman collection for the APIs you've just created.
Yeah.
So let's say you want to share an API with someone else and you want to make them try that API out or understand what you're offering. Are you on Mac?
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, you could also use a brew, but I think this method is also fine.
And I haven't used Postman in a while because I've used extensions like built into VS Code recently just for testing out basic HTTP requests. But the ability to export those is very handy for people to use.
Yeah.
To
Maybe we
test.
can even try. I would be interested. I don't know how it works, but maybe we can also try the VS Code extension if that works.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let's see.
If you have experience with that, I'm curious.
Import. See, let's show it. Your class collections. Convert to Postman. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure inside of that how you would import.
Okay. Maybe drag and drop. Can you, or just use Postman? It's also fine.
Yeah. So let's see. Trying to move. Skip and go to the app. All right. So here is Postman. And the name that we just downloaded is Next.js. And then you just drag. Can you just drag the JSON file in here? Or do you need to go to?
I think you need to click import. There's a button at the top left, import. Yeah. There's. And now you can drop it.
Gotcha. Cool.
Okay, import that and open up WunderGraph.
Riker says this is tailored towards serverless nerds like me. Absolutely.
Okay, and click on queries.
Yep.
And then users get. And you see we defined, go back to TypeScript. I think like this is, I like it so much. Go to the TypeScript function where we defined, we defined the input. It takes an ID and that is reflected in the Postman collection. So put whatever you want there and it should be a string. No, leave ID. ID needs to be there.
Oh, sorry, the value.
Set the value. Yes.
Yeah, gotcha. Just type
something.
anything.
Yeah, and then let's try it out. And yeah, you need to activate it on the left.
Oh, with the checkbox? Yes. Gotcha. Okay.
Actually, you just found a very interesting feature of WunderGraph. So you define ID as string. We create a JSON schema for that, which is applied as a middleware on the API gateway, which you didn't see it exists. And we're validating the input. And you can also define like regex or whatever you want. And that's the stuff you get from an invisible API gateway. And I think what's super important to note, again, we talked about that before. Everybody can integrate APIs. Everybody can make a fetch from everywhere. But what you do here is you create a function in TypeScript or a graphical operation that follows our paradigms. And the output is you get an automated deployment and you get a Postman collection. And later, even more, like we have ideas of also generating an open API spec or even a gRPC proxy. So if you wanted to, in theory, you could talk gRPC to this service. But for the moment, let's keep it with Next.js. And yeah, just wanted to very briefly show the integration with Postman. I think that's super helpful if you're building an API for other people and they want to understand and explore your API.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super neat. Where should we go next?
Okay, let's combine two APIs. So we have something. Let me quickly check one of the examples.
Amo commented, I love how much code gets auto-generated from little code. I love that too.
Yeah, examples. Here. Okay, got it. Cross API joins. Okay, I paste you a little code snippet. Where do I post it in the chat here? I think that should be fine.
And you can put it in the private chat. Yeah.
Yeah, I did that. So we need two APIs. We need a weather API and the countries API, and then we can work a bit with that stuff.
So where should I put that?
Go to WunderGraph config.ts.
Yep.
Yes, and we're adding new API dependencies. So you can say introspect something, or you just do it copy paste. It's fine.
Okay, so
yeah, probably the
formatting.
I guess
is
the first
gonna be off.
Yeah. The first line you don't need.
So we already have. Yep, already have that.
And then unmess this stuff.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Let's see.
And configure WunderGraph application. We already have that, so remove it. Okay.
Cool.
So that gives us two more APIs, weather and countries. And now scroll down a bit and add those to your API.
And let's make sure that this is still, so just to make sure this is still running, because I think this is going to kick off some more auto generation stuff when I save this file.
Did you hit save?
Not yet. I was kind of waiting to make sure
okay.
we had it visible.
Then
yeah.
Hit save.
Yep. So it should go through and.
Yeah. So what this does is it introspects again the services, adds them to the Vercel graph. You can actually check in the generated directory. You can check WunderGraph schema GraphQL. And here you can see on the query type, we have SpaceX, and then you scroll down a bit and you should see another namespace,
countries,
weather,
yep,
and countries.
Yeah.
Okay, let's create an operation and we call that, I don't know, country weather.graphql.
Okay, so inside of operations, country
weather.
Does that matter?
.graphql. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you start typing query. And then you start with country or countries, I think.
Countries.
That's the namespace, and then underscore. Yeah, countries, and then country, I think.
And then open brackets.
Yes, and then you can select a couple of fields. I think, what do we get? Code, name, and capital.
Code, name, capital.
And I think it takes a parameter. Is that correct?
Looks like doesn't like country's country. Are we sure that's the right namespace?
Yeah, can you check it? What did we use in the WunderGraph config TS?
And WunderGraph countries as the namespace.
Okay, and go back to the generated.
Generated the schema.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
so
there's
countries are there. Okay, there is country.
yeah. Okay, that's fine. We should be using that. Go to the function again. Country weather. Do we have a typo here? I'm not sure. Somehow it complains, right?
Countries, country. Do I get? Not getting the IntelliSense, which may be my
Yeah.
VS Code setup. Let's see if I copy and paste it.
Okay, and then add code name and capital. And code. Yeah. And for countries, we need to pass in an argument, which is, let me check. It should be ID.
I was hoping I had an example in this. I never know the syntax for GraphQL. So it's inside of parentheses and then.
Yeah, then ID. And then colon. And then you can do $ID. Okay, and then after query in line 1, we create a variable. So directly after query. I can also give you a link as an example.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want to do yourself.
No, I can. Yeah, I'm fine just copying it in. It's better than people watching me like struggle to type GraphQL.
Okay, that's fine.
WunderGraph account mentioned I might have to refresh VS Code. Maybe. Could be. Yeah, this will be. I think this will be much easier.
Yeah.
Let's paste this in. And kind of the basic part of this query, like before. So we'll get rid of the join to start. I think this is what
I think it still complains about.
Yeah. It may just be a like VS Code not catching up.
Yeah. And can you, for the moment, can you remove the capital variable? Because
This
that
one?
would be not working at this stage. Yeah. Remove that, and export as, you can also remove it.
Which part? Sorry.
After capital, the export as, you can remove that stuff.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if we save it like that, we can now try this out. So in this case, we could just use curl if we want.
To
try out our API, yes.
Can we just do it in Postman? Would that be easier? Or is there like, do I need to format a curl request?
Oh, I have a better idea. Let's just use Next.js because we haven't shown any Next.js code generation yet. So if we head over to our Next.js code, yeah, we have an index. Do you want to create like a new page?
Sure.
Just create like a country weather page somewhere.
Weather TSX.
Yeah, and then just create like a regular. You have like a snippet. Awesome.
Yeah, it's React functional component, so it should get most of it.
Okay, and then we have a hook. So if you look at the index TSX.
Sorry, I don't know where I got the extra cursor from. So in the index.tss, to get an example of the hook.
Yeah, so you have this use query hook, and you pass an operation name, and that's basically it.
Yeah, so let's do that. And paste, not copy this one. Copy that, paste that. So we have our use query hook. In this case, the operational name is going to come from the config. So that's going to
be. It comes from the path of your country weather operation. So it's really just country weather in this case.
Oh, from the actual path of the file.
Yeah. So
Okay.
in this case, as we created that in the root, it's really just country weather.
And this will, since it's the name of the file, we're camel casing.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
right? So okay, cool.
Yeah. And that
And
should also autocomplete.
part is that inside of here?
Yeah. And then do we have an input defined on the operation?
The operation. So country weather input being country code.
Yeah. So on the hook, you create an input, just input without S.
It's an
And
object.
then, yes, and then pass
Country code.
yes.
USA.
I think it's US.
US. Okay. By the way, Heather and Flemo joined on Twitch. What's up, everyone? How's it going? Cool.
Okay, so let's try typing out that data on our page.
Yeah. So where's the JSON pack? There we go. Let's do country weather and just get that full JSON. Okay. So we have a brand new page, which is / country weather. We are getting it from the operation, which comes from this GraphQL. So hopefully we'll get back the code name and capital and the country.
Is it capital W or not?
I think I'm confusing myself because I think I made the page. The page is not uppercase weather. The other thing that I did was uppercase letter.
Okay.
Also, unfortunately, this is showing up, but the color coding on here is not so great. But that is just the application in general, so not a data problem.
Yeah, okay. Data is loading. Yep.
That's
great. We get the country code. And again, one important thing, so we use this hook here, it is generated. If you look at the network tab, and we refresh this, you will see that this is already an RPC call. We're not doing GraphQL here. So the moment you define this operation, it gets persisted into an RPC endpoint, and then nobody will ever see that as a GraphQL endpoint.
Yeah. And then we also,
yeah, go ahead.
The revalidation. We talked about this earlier, but kind of clicked away for 10 seconds or so and came back, and then it did a revalidation query. You can see.
Yeah, that's all like behavior, default behavior of SWR.
Yeah. Yep. Cool.
Okay, so now we turn this, we expand this operation a little bit, and yeah, combine the country data with some weather data. So if you want to just paste the full operation, yes,
like this.
Exactly. So what's happening here? I need to explain this a little bit. So we have in line 1, we have country code, which is a string, and that is the variable that we expose to the user. We also have capital, which is also a string, but we mark it as internal. So the JSON schema for the user will omit this field. It's like a placeholder for us. And then as we walk, so our GraphQL execution engine, as it walks through the different fields, so it resolves code in line 3, then in line 4 it resolves name, and then capital. As it traverses capital, it sees, okay, we need to export that as capital. So we export the value of capital into our variable capital. And then in line 6, we have a special field. It's called _join. _join embeds a second query into the first query. We also apply a transform, so we flatten a bit the response. It's not so important now. But essentially what we do is we embed one query into another query, and we can export a value from the first resolved operation into a variable, you reuse that. And in this case, what this allows us to do, so this is 100% valid GraphQL. And what it allows us to do is we now created an RPC operation by just using GraphQL that joins country and weather data. And if you save that, we can check out our front end.
And it shouldn't, the actual code that we had for the query itself hasn't changed, because we're still, the only thing that we see in making our, or writing our code, is the country code, which stays the same. And the capital part that you mentioned before is internal only. So it's not something I, the developer, have to work with.
You can also, if you go to the generated folder, there is something
in the GraphQL.
No, there's something. What was the name? It has something with schema. JSON schema TS. It's almost the top. Yeah, and here, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see that's the dragons operation. And here's country weather. Yes, go to the where country weather starts actually. Exactly here, and you can see country weather input is an object. Country code type string. Additional properties false and required country code. So our internal variable is, it doesn't exist. So if you try to pass country the capital, it won't work.
Okay, understood. So now what we're expecting, again, I need to, can I add this basic styles to this page? What did they do in the home page? Oh, this is this just using Tailwind? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it has Tailwind. If you know something about Tailwind, then
yep. That I
text right.
Yep.
Okay.
And here we go. So get the country data, and then also for that city, then have the weather data combined together.
Yes.
Cool. Love that. I feel like that's really powerful, because that's something I feel like we have to do a lot, is query one API based on the result of another. So being able to connect that in one, basically one query from a developer perspective, from a code perspective, is pretty neat.
Yeah. And now let's say you want to create, like, we're almost happy, but product owner says we want to get rid of this country array. It should really just be an API that takes an ID and it gives us back one country. So what we can do is we create a wrapper function around this with TypeScript. So we create a new TypeScript file in our operations.
So in operations, and what should we name that one?
Whatever you like. Like we had country weather.
Formatted country weather.
Yeah, for example.
The TypeScript file.
Yes, and then if you check the get TS, we can just steal a bunch of things from there, I think. Yeah, copy that stuff.
Cool.
And the import path should be a bit different. Like 2 dots need to go, I think.
Yep.
Is it correct?
Go up from, yeah, there we go. Yep.
Okay. And now you see in line 7, we pass input. So ID, that's actually great. Alongside input, we should also have something called operations.
Input.
After input, like the object that is passed to handler func, that currently we deconstruct it into input.
Oh,
it also has this input. It also has operations. Exactly.
Yep.
And what this allows you to do is, so GraphQL and TypeScript operations are fully interoperable, and you can call from TypeScript, you can call GraphQL operations and vice versa. So you can now make a new line and just call operations. I think it's operations query or something.
Dot query.
Yeah, I think so. And then, yeah, that's a function.
Yep.
Are we overloading your ID a bit?
I don't know. Maybe VS Code isn't used to all the IntelliSense, but it's coming through. Yeah.
Okay. And then you pass an object. And you pass the operation name. It's actually the same syntax as with the TypeScript client in the front end.
So like this one. But there for reference. So use query. So operations.query, and then this is operation name.
Yes, exactly.
That's country
and then pass
weather.
Yep.
There's the IntelliSense starting to pop up. And then
that now you also have to pass the input. I think that was ID.
We did it like this last time.
Yes. And then ID, and from
Oh,
input
should I
you
just
can pass it. Yeah, you can pass it through.
Can I just do this?
I think so, yeah. Should
To
be
pass
should
that
be fine.
input object?
Yeah, should be fine.
Okay.
I think you need a comma, no?
Here?
After input.
Another one?
Does it allow us to do that?
I don't know.
It should be fine, but
yeah,
otherwise
try...
just input ID.
Not sure why it doesn't like. Not assignable.
Type ID string is missing what?
Type ID string is not assignable to internal country weather input. Country weather input. That is... Oh, is it country code instead of...
Yes. Yeah.
Country code.
Yeah, now you have the IntelliSense. It's a bit laggy, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is really interesting about thinking about comparing this to VS Code now. Is the goal? I'm assuming the goal of this is to get back like data like this and then transform.
Yeah, exactly.
It?
Yeah, okay. And then you can format that.
And what did you suggested that we get rid of?
Yeah, we can remove that array, exactly.
The country array. So just set. So let's see, data. So probably destructure that. And data dot country equals data dot country first element. Does that seem right?
Yeah, maybe. Let's try.
And then return data in the end.
Let's try calling that.
Yeah.
Do you get IntelliSense for data? I'm not sure.
No, but that may be VS Code not keeping up with those types. At least not yet, at least.
Yeah.
I still wonder about this one. I wonder if that's just property capital. Internal weather capital is declared here. The
Can you just add capital as whatever you want? Yeah. I think we just found a bug. I think if we create this internal, we create this internal directive, and so far I've never used the TypeScript operations to call an internal to call an operation that has an internal variable. I think that's actually a bug. So it's
glad
good
we were able to find something.
Tried this out here.
That's right. Yeah. This is a safe space.
People from WunderGraph on the stream, please take a note on our linear board.
I love that.
Cool.
And so to do this now, we're wanting to call formatted country weather.
Yes. So
if
in
we
our
go
front end,
back,
we can now change that to format it. Country weather. What's our argument? Is it country code or ID?
it's country code. Oh, well, the input is defined as ID
Yeah, ID.
up
Okay.
here.
Call
Should
ID.
we update that to make it make more sense? Just to
Yeah,
be
just make it country code. It's fine.
country code. And this is using Zod, by the way,
Yes.
which is a very hot topic recently. Cool.
What's the discussion?
I think people just are loving Zod. I feel like I've heard about it several times recently of people really enjoying it. So,
Does it do what we want?
maybe not. I wonder if input.id. Oh, sorry. That's because I broke stuff. Or at least part of the reason. I think that's probably, yeah, there we go. The formatting still doesn't look right for that. So country, so I cheat and log out data here and see what that looks like. I see it in the logs here. Maybe I won't. I'm trying to see if it's getting to this request. Async, but I don't see the logs coming. Oh, there we go. There's data. That's not what I'm looking for.
Ah, yeah. You see, it's data, and then weather by city something. If you scroll to in the logs to the bottom, yeah,
This
it's
part?
data, weather, get city by name, and then weather, right?
So does that mean I've already destructured data here? It then has another data property? Is that
So
right?
what you log, it looks. Is it what you are actually logging? I'm not sure.
So I have a fun trick for this.
Okay.
If I remember the shortcut, there we go. It's just it's called turbo log to help add some fancier logs to things. So that is not what was logging out.
By the way, have you saved country weather TSX? Maybe.
I did not. There we go. There's after all the intricate things that we can do to debug that, like saving
Yeah,
is number one.
that's
to
something
check.
you don't
Yeah.
run into when you're using JetBrains. It does that for you.
To autosave.
Yeah, it does that.
Yeah, VS Code can. I don't have it turned on. Which I guess there's not a huge reason not to. Most of the time you want it to anyway, but
Yeah.
okay.
So yeah, I think that was a great intro. Like,
Yeah.
WunderGraph does a few other things, like you could now integrate authentication, for example, with OpenID Connect. We recently added a super cool feature. You can add or inject, we support those directives. You can inject custom claims into operations, for example. So if you create like a user group in Auth0 or Keycloak and you assign the users in such a group, you assign them a certain claim, you can inject that into a graphical operation. And yeah, we're also planning a couple of very interesting things in the cloud. So one thing we want to do in the future is we want to add support for long running operations. So if you integrate multiple APIs, let's say, for example, one thing we do is we deploy stuff on fly.io using their APIs. And that means over a period of like a minute or something, we have to make API calls back and forth. Obviously, a lot can go wrong in the meantime. So what those workflows will allow you to do is define kind of like a saga pattern style where you can say, okay, we have a workflow, we need to make such API calls. If something goes wrong, try it again, try it again, try it again. And then if it breaks, we can clean up the mess. We want to add pub sub functionality. to WunderGraph Cloud out of the box, like the way you used internal operations, that would also just give you pub/sub functionality, key value store, a couple of things coming in the future, just to really remove the burden of DevOps for most developers and give people a great great framework to build APIs and integrations. So yeah, that's what we're currently doing, and well, it was great to have this quick overview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Really quickly, as we're wrapping up for people, two things. One, if you have any last minute questions, throw them in the chat. And then the last thing is just a reminder to people for the swag giveaway. So just leave a comment on the YouTube video itself with something you thought was cool that you enjoyed in the video, and or like pain points that you've had with working with APIs or GraphQL or API gateways, something like that, etc. Put a comment on the YouTube video, and we'll choose a couple of winners in a couple of days. I want to kind of like just reiterate the last part that I thought was really cool, being able to like augment, being able to interoperably interact with like GraphQL, things that you created in GraphQL and TypeScript, and then also augment queries and change the data. And I think that was a cool example with like the business team comes back and wants things formatted in a different way. You have full custom or full control over integrating different operations that you've already defined and then customizing that data to fit what the expectations are for the audience.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases you can get very far with, like, you integrate APIs, you can get very far with GraphQL until you hit a certain place where you're like, okay, but I need some custom logic. Whereas on the other side, you have people who are starting out from scratch. They want to define just a couple of operations, talk to the database. And in that use case, you just start with TypeScript functions, and that's totally fine. And later you can add more API dependencies like a database or something, and then evolve your application. So it kind of caters to multiple use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe one last question for you, because I don't actually know TRPC. Someone was just asking about the difference between TRPC and WunderGraph.
Yeah, so TRPC, it's a framework that allows you to define remote procedures using TypeScript. And the way you define the TRPC router is you can, do you know the export and import type syntax in TypeScript? Are you aware of that?
I've imported types from like npm packages or something like that.
Yeah, but what is special about export? Like, you can export something like the real thing, or you can export type. And what export type in TypeScript does is it exports the RPC type definitions of the router, but it doesn't export the code of the server. And the client can then import this router definition, and by doing so, the client becomes type safe. And this is actually a technique we're also using in WunderGraph. So when you define a TypeScript operation, you will actually see, if you look into the code, you will see that the operation definition, like if you change, for example, ID in the Zot schema, it will automatically update the client and tell you that ID is wrong. So we use the same pattern. Regarding the question, what's the difference between TRPC and WunderGraph? So TRPC is really a low-level framework that gives the user complete freedom on how they want to use that. Like, you can, for example, if you want to use TRPC with subscriptions, which they also support, you have to set up the transport. Like, you can set up a WebSocket server or something like that. The big difference here is WunderGraph is simply very opinionated on how you structure your operations, how you structure your code, and what the results are. And this way, in WunderGraph, you don't have to think about the transport. Like if you now take our operations we created and you deploy that to WunderGraph Cloud, you will see that each operation, like a subscription operation, it turns into an HTTP2 stream, and your generated client can call that. You don't have the flexibility like TRPC where you can like build your own transport or something like that, but you also have to think about how to do that. So TRPC is really super low level. Everybody can use it the way they want. WunderGraph is super opinionated, and this opinionatedness, it results in you can create GraphQL and TypeScript operations side by side, and it results in Postman collection without doing anything.
Yeah. Cool. Hopefully that helped. If people have other questions later on, feel free to there's the link to WunderGraph Discord. So you can join there and ask questions. If you have a question that I can help forward along later on, feel free to ask me, reach out to me, and I can forward it along to the team. And I guess with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But Jens, thank you for joining and walking us through this. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. We will catch everyone later. Thanks again, everyone, for participating. And I'll go ahead and put up the thanks for watching banner. But thank you all. We'll see you later.